After Eugene passed, I never quite knew how to fill the silence that came with his absence. The house was the same, yet everything felt different. It was a strange thing, being surrounded by memories of a life you had once shared, but no longer could. I kept to myself, mostly spending the days tending to the garden and walking the familiar paths through the house. The walls that had once echoed with laughter and conversation now stood quiet as if they too were mourning. When Eugene was alive, we worked side by side, building everything together. The house, the business, even the legacy we had created, it was all ours. But now it felt like something was slipping through my fingers, and I wasn't sure how to hold on to it. I went about my days mechanically, as if it was the only thing I knew how to do. I didn't expect things to change, not right away. But there were moments, fleeting as they were, where I found myself staring out the window, hoping that some sense of connection would return. It never did. Then came the letter, the one Eugene had written but never sent. It was tucked in the back of the drawer, hidden behind old bank statements and faded receipts. I didn't know why I hadn't found it sooner. Perhaps subconsciously, I had been avoiding it. When I opened it, I found not just words, but a plan for me. Eugene had known, in his quiet way, that I would need to be prepared for the future, for when he was gone. I read the letter over and over. Eugene had set aside everything for me, everything he knew I would need to carry on. He had arranged a trust, $20 million, carefully invested over the years. I could hardly comprehend it. The money didn't matter to me, not really. It was the thought behind it. Eugene had taken care of everything, and still, I said nothing. I couldn't bring myself to share it with anyone, not even August. The days passed, and I thought little of the money until the phone rang. It was August. The call came unexpectedly, just when I was beginning to settle into the rhythm of my new life, or perhaps it was more accurate to say my lonely life. The phone buzzed sharply, interrupting my thoughts, and when I looked down, I saw August's name on the screen. I hadn't heard from him in months, not since the funeral, not since the days when I needed him most. He was always busy, he said, wrapped up in work, lost in the world he'd carved for himself. Still, I couldn't help the small flutter of hope that rose in my chest. Maybe this time it was different. I almost didn't pick up. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment, and I wondered if this would be another one of those awkward, distant conversations we had gotten used to, but I pressed accept anyway. "Hi, Mom." His voice came through the line softer than I expected. "I was wondering if you'd like to join me for dinner. Just the two of us, if that's all right." Dinner. A part of me couldn't quite believe what I was hearing. August asking me to dinner felt as foreign as the idea of him wanting to spend time with me. I'd spent years trying to draw him close, to fill the space between us that had grown over time, but it was always a struggle. And now, out of nowhere, he was asking me to dinner. I smiled into the phone, though I knew he couldn't see it. "Of course," I replied. "I'd love to." I didn't question him further. I didn't ask why. Now, after all these months, he suddenly felt the need to reach out. I didn't wonder about the real reason behind it. I just wanted to believe that maybe this was the start of something new between us. He told me he'd pick me up at 6, and that he'd arranged a reservation at a place he described as really nice. The words didn't register immediately. A fancy restaurant. We'd never been the kind of family to frequent such places. It felt out of place, almost as if August were trying to prove something I didn't fully understand. As the day wore on, I prepared for our dinner. I felt a strange mixture of anticipation and anxiety. It had been years since we had shared anything resembling a meal together, much less one in such an extravagant setting. Still, I couldn't deny that I was looking forward to it. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this dinner would be more than just another one of his obligations. I dressed carefully, trying to put myself together the best I could. When the doorbell rang, my heart raced. I opened it to find August standing there, looking polished and professional as always. He gave me a smile that seemed almost practiced, but I was too eager to think too much about it. "Ready, Mom?" he asked, and I nodded, ready for whatever was to come. The drive to the restaurant was quiet, and I found myself studying August in the rearview mirror. He was focused on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel with that calm determination he always had. His demeanor was calm, controlled, almost too controlled, but I tried to ignore the subtle distance between us. I told myself I was being too sensitive, that he was just being his usual self. The restaurant was one of those places I'd read about in magazines, but never actually stepped foot in. The kind of place where the menu was printed on leather and the lights were so dim, it felt like the world outside was far away. I'd never been to a restaurant like this with Eugene. We were never ones to splurge on dining out. Our meals were always simple, homemade. But here we were in this extravagant place, and I couldn't help but feel out of place. As we walked in, August spoke to the host, and soon we were seated at a corner table, the kind of spot that gave us privacy, but still offered a clear view of the dimly lit dining room. I couldn't help but notice how smoothly everything flowed for August. The waiter brought us wine without asking, and when I tried to politely decline, August insisted, smiling in that way he always did when he was trying to appear considerate. I could almost hear the unspoken words, "It's just one glass, Mom. Relax." The wine was smooth and aged, just like everything in his world. I took a small sip, letting the unfamiliar taste linger in my mouth, trying to play along with the evening. We hadn't even started the appetizer, and already I felt as though a wall was growing between us. As we ate, the conversation meandered. It was mostly about his work, new projects, deadlines, deals, the things I could never keep up with. He asked about me, of course, but only in passing. How was I? How was the house? Small talk that filled the gaps but didn't reach anyone. The polite exchanges we'd grown used to over the years. But then, just as I thought the night might pass without incident, August dropped his voice a little lower. His tone was suddenly more serious, like he was preparing me for something. "Mom, about the estate." He began, his eyes not meeting mine as he took a sip of his own wine. "You know we've been meaning to sort things out with Dad's assets." I froze the fork halfway to my mouth. I had been bracing for this moment, but it still hit me like a cold wave. He was getting to the point, and I could feel my heart tighten in my chest. The rest of the meal suddenly didn't matter. The laughter, the small talk, none of it was real. I set my fork down, slowly trying not to reveal the rush of emotions that flooded me. I had been waiting for this, but hearing it now, here in this pristine restaurant, felt so out of place. I took a deep breath and glanced up at August. This was it. The reason for dinner, the reason he'd reached out. But he wasn't looking at me. He was already shuffling through his papers, organizing something on the table in front of him unaware of the weight of what he had just said. The moment August began speaking about the estate, the air in the room seemed to thicken. I had braced myself for this, but the casual way he brought it up left me unsettled. I watched him pull out a thick folder from his briefcase, his eyes focused on the contents as if this were just another business deal, another task to check off his list. He didn't even look up at me when he began speaking again. We've been talking to some people, getting advice on how to manage Dad's estate. There's a lot to handle, and it would be easier if we consolidated everything under one name, he said, his voice smooth, but lacking any real emotion. I thought it would be best if we get everything in order, now you know, before the taxes start piling up. I stared at him, a knot tightening in my chest. Taxes. This wasn't about taxes. This was about control, about him taking over everything. Eugene had worked so hard to build everything he'd left for me, and he was making it sound so simple, so casual, like it was just an inconvenience to be handled. He continued, oblivious to the tension building between us. It'll be easier for you, Mom. You won't have to worry about anything. We'll take care of it. You can still live here. Nothing will change, I promise. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I couldn't. I wanted to shout, to ask him why he thought I would just sign away everything that Eugene had worked for, everything that had meant so much to us, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I looked at the folder in front of him, at the neatly printed documents with my name already filled in. My heart dropped as I realized what was happening. August wasn't asking, he was telling me, and he had already planned it all. The papers, the transfer, the sale. It was all just a formality to him. He hadn't even bothered to ask if I wanted to keep the house, the land, the memories. It was never about me. It was about what was easiest for him, what would give him more power, more control. I didn't pick up the folder. I didn't even touch the papers. I just sat there, my hands folded tightly in my lap, staring at the neat typeface, the legalese that meant nothing to me. This wasn't about the estate. It was about who he thought I was and who I had become in his eyes. August. I finally said, my voice steady but firm. I'm not signing anything. The words hung in the air, heavier than the silence that followed. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells around him. I wasn't afraid to speak up, even if it meant disappointing him, even if it meant losing him altogether. I waited for him to respond, but his eyes remained fixed on the papers, his fingers nervously tapping the table. The conversation was far from over, but I had made my choice. The real question now was what he would do next. I didn't expect August to react the way he did. I thought he might argue, demand that I see reason or guilt, trip me into changing my mind. But he didn't. He sat there still as a statue, his eyes focused on the papers, refusing to meet my gaze. I watched him for a long moment, waiting for him to speak, to offer some explanation, some justification. But nothing came. The silence stretched between us, suffocating and uncomfortable, until I finally spoke again. Eugene left this for me, not for you, not for anyone else. This is my decision. The words felt foreign coming out of my mouth, as though I had never said them before. For so long, I had been waiting for him to come around to see me as more than just a mother, more than just an afterthought. But in that moment, I realized that it didn't matter anymore. It was my choice, my future. I know what you're trying to do. August. I continued, my voice firm, though my hands were still trembling slightly. But I'm not handing over control of everything just because you think it's easier for you. His jaw clenched, but he still didn't say anything. For a brief moment, I considered giving in, pretending it didn't hurt, and signing the papers. I could have done that. I could have let him have his way, let him take everything, and simply fade into the background, as I always had. But something in me snapped. Something deep inside me told me that I deserved better. I wasn't just a piece of property to be transferred and sold. I was Eugene's wife. I had a voice. I had a right to decide what happened to the life we built together. August let out a sigh, his shoulders slumping. Finally, his eyes met mine, though they were filled with frustration and disbelief. Mom, he began, his tone softer, but no less urgent. This isn't about control. This is about making sure you're taken care of. You don't have to worry about any of this. I'll handle everything. I always do. I shook my head, the finality of it sinking in. I could see the way he looked at me like I was a relic, something that had outlived its usefulness. He didn't understand. He didn't understand that this wasn't about him taking care of me. It was about me taking care of myself, about protecting what was mine. What Eugene had left behind wasn't just money or property. It was a legacy. And I wasn't going to let that legacy be erased. I'm not signing anything. I repeated, my voice stronger, now the words feeling more natural. This land, this home, it stays in the family, and it stays with me. August didn't respond. He just stood up, gathering the papers, stuffing them back into the folder with a sharp, frustrated movement. He didn't look at me again as he turned toward the door, and as he walked out, I realized that nothing would ever be the same between us. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't mind. As the door clicked shut behind him, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. This was my decision, my life, and now I was ready to protect it. The days after August left were strangely quiet. The house, which had once felt so full of noise and life, now seemed to echo in a way that was both comforting and unsettling. I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation, about the way August had looked at me, disappointment and frustration written on his face, like I had betrayed him. But what was I supposed to do? Just hand everything over because it was easier for him. The guilt that I thought would settle in didn't. Instead, there was a steady calm that had begun to settle in my chest. I had made the right decision. I had to remind myself of that, even when my mind kept circling back to August's face, his plea that I let him take care of everything. That was the crux of it, wasn't it? He wanted control. He wanted to manage everything, even me. The following morning, I found myself staring out the window at the sprawling fields behind the house. Eugene had always loved this land, and we had spent years building not just the house, but the life we shared within these walls. And now here, I was standing up to my own son to protect it. It felt heavy, yet empowering, as if I were finally stepping into a space I had avoided for too long. I heard the knock on the door before I saw the car pull up. The familiar sound of footsteps on the porch confirmed my suspicions. August was back. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't hesitate. I walked to the door, opened it, and stood there, waiting. I wasn't going to let him walk all over me this time. Not anymore. August didn't waste time with pleasantries. His face was flushed, his eyes sharp. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside before I could even invite him in. "I think we've already talked enough," I replied, closing the door softly behind him. I couldn't help but feel a pang of something, maybe regret or maybe just sadness. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. But here we were on opposite sides. He sat down at the kitchen table, glancing at me as if I were a stranger. Why didn't you tell me about the money, Mom? About the trust? You think I wouldn't have helped you? I sat across from him, folding my hands in my lap. The air between us was thick, charged with something I hadn't expected. Because I didn't need your help, August. I didn't want your help either. This money, this land, it's mine. Eugene's legacy wasn't for you to take control of. His brow furrowed frustration, bubbling to the surface. You're being unreasonable. This isn't about the money. It's about making sure you're not struggling. It's about family. I could feel my chest tighten as I spoke. It's about respect, August. It's about respecting what your father and I built and respecting me enough to let me keep it. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh, pushing the papers across the table toward me. You're making a mistake. I looked at the papers, then back at him. I had made my choice. I've already made my decision. August. I'm not signing anything. His face hardened, but he stood up without saying another word. He didn't slam the door on his way out, but the silence that followed felt louder than anything. The confrontation was over, and though I knew it wasn't the end of our relationship, I also knew it was the start of something new for both of us. And as the door clicked shut behind him, I couldn't help but feel like for the first time in years, I had finally stood up for myself. The days after August left were quieter than I expected. I thought there would be more tension, more weight to carry, but instead, it was as if a fog had lifted. I moved through the house, still heavy with memories of Eugene, but I wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time, I could breathe. The land, the house, everything I had once given to my family, it was mine to protect. And now, I had a plan. I spent the next few days in the study, going over the paperwork Eugene had left for me. I had kept it locked away, unsure of what to do with it, but now it was clear. This money, this legacy was not just for me. It was for the community, for the generations that would follow. Eugene had always believed in giving back, in creating something that lasted longer than his name. And now it was my turn to carry that vision forward. I called a lawyer, one I'd worked with briefly years ago when Eugene had set up the trust. He was surprised to hear from me, but after a few minutes of explaining what had happened, he understood. He set up an appointment for the following week, and together we would begin the process of establishing the Griffin Legacy Foundation. It would be a place where the land would serve the community, an educational space, a retreat for those in need, a place to honor the work Eugene and I had put into this home. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the decision I had made was the right one. It wasn't just about protecting the estate. It was about giving it a purpose beyond profit, beyond a name on a deed. This land had always meant something more, and now it would mean something even bigger. I was finally honoring what Eugene had believed in what I had believed in. There were moments of doubt, of course. The quiet stillness would settle in, and I would wonder if August had been right. Was I being too stubborn, too proud? But those moments passed quickly. Eugene had never wanted me to be anyone's burden, and I wasn't about to start now. I wasn't going to let this land slip through my fingers because I was afraid of losing my son's approval. A week later, the lawyer called to let me know that the foundation was officially set up. It was a small start, but it was real. It was mine. I sat at the kitchen table looking out the window at the land, the trees that had grown as I had. It was as if the house, the land, and everything in it were finally starting to feel like it was truly mine again. I didn't expect August to call, but that didn't matter anymore. I had already chosen my path, and I was finally ready to walk it. The days passed in a blur, filled with phone calls, meetings, and the quiet satisfaction that came with seeing the foundation take shape. I had put my heart into it, just as Eugene and I had put our hearts into everything we built together. It wasn't just about the property or the money. It was about creating something that honored our legacy, something that would outlast all of us. And now it was real. The first event, hosted by the Griffin Legacy Foundation, was a small gathering at the house. I invited a few close friends, members of the community, and some of the women I had worked with over the years. The evening was simple, but it felt like a celebration. The warmth of the house, the familiar hum of conversation, the laughter, it felt right. It felt like home. Elliot didn't come. I had expected that. There had been no word from him since our last conversation. He didn't understand, and I wasn't sure he ever would. But that was okay. It was time for me to stop waiting for his approval time, to stop hoping that one day he would see me for who I was, for what I had done. I had spent too many years living in the shadows, in the quiet hope that he would come around, but I realized now that I couldn't wait for him anymore. I had to live my life for myself. The night was filled with warmth and laughter, but there was also a bittersweet feeling that lingered in the air. I couldn't ignore it, the emptiness that came from knowing that August wasn't there, that he wasn't part of this new chapter. I thought about him, often wondering if he was out there, wondering if he would ever come back. But in the quiet of the evening, I realized something. I couldn't keep waiting for him to change. I couldn't keep hoping for a future that might never come. The future was mine to shape, and I couldn't let him hold me back. The event ended late, with everyone leaving with smiles and promises to return. I stood at the door, watching as the last car disappeared down the driveway. The house was quiet again, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt full of possibility, full of purpose. I had finally taken control of my own life, and the foundation was just the beginning. I sat in the living room, staring out the window at the moonlit land that stretched before me. Eugene had always believed in the power of this place, and now I did too. It wasn't just land, it was a symbol of everything we had worked for, everything we had built, and everything I was still capable of. The next chapter had already begun. I was ready to face it, no matter where it led.